In this video, I'm going to show you 3 different types of plots. We're going to go over a dot plot, a histogram, and a box plot. So let's go ahead and get started with a dot plot. Here's what a dot plot looks like. It's simply what it sounds like. We have our scale here down at the bottom, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I've just plot dots for each of the values here. There are 2 values of 5, 1, 2, 3 values of 6, 1, 2, 3, 4 values of 7, and 2 values of 8. So dot plots are really simple. They're good for small data sets. They're a good way to show clusters and gaps and outliers in the data. So what I mean is I can see exactly where all of these dots are located on the dot plot. Say there was a gap here, say I didn't have all of these values at 6, I would be able to see that very clearly in my dot plot that there's a gap there. I would be able to see outliers. Let's say we had an outlier somewhere far off in the distance. I would be able to see where that outlier is. And then I can see all of this data also clustered together too. So I can see lots of details within my data with dot plots. Again, they're best for small data sets though, because if I have a large data set, I'm just going to be plotting dot after dot after dot. So if you have hundreds of data points, a dot plot might not be the best, but if you have like around 20 or so, or even more or less, a dot plot might be a good plot. And then dot plots can be used for numerical data, like you see here in this example. They can also be used for categorical data. So maybe I'm plotting the number of people with certain color eyes. Instead of these numbers down here on the axis, I could write the color of their eyes here. So here's for blue eyes. And then I could, who has green eyes, and then I could see how many people have brown eyes, and so on. I could use these for categorical data, so categories rather than just numbers. So those are some advantages of the dot plot. Next is a histogram. Histogram, as you can see here, it's similar to the dot plot in that it has this scale here on the bottom. But with a histogram, we can't see specific values. We can only see how many values there are within a certain range. So instead of being specific values, all the histograms, all the values are put into what we call bins. So here's a bin from 0 to 10, and I could see how many points I have there. I'd have a scale here on the left-hand side with tick marks, so I could see exactly how tall each one of these is, and then be able to count how many values are there. But again, say there are 4 values within this bin from 0 to 10. I know there are 4 values, but I don't know exactly what those 4 values are. Maybe they're all a value of 2 between 0 and 10. Maybe they could be any possible combination of values there. So I can't see specific values. Histograms are really good for huge data sets though, when we might have tons and tons of data where if we were to plot those on a dot plot, it would just be too many dots. We can easily just create a bar here for our histogram. It's a lot easier than making dots, and an easier way, instead of having to count how many dots there are, we'll just look at our scale on the left hand side and be able to see the height of that bar. So say this side would be marked. I would easily be able to see the height of that bar without having to count 1, 2, 3, 4 like on a dot plot. So really good for huge data sets. These though, they can only be used for numerical data, so we can't do categorical data on histograms, just numerical. And one other advantage of the histogram is that you can change the intervals. So that means I could play around when I'm creating a histogram, and maybe instead of making these bins separated in intervals of 10, like you see here, maybe I change it so that it's in intervals of 20, And then I would have to combine some of my data here. So maybe I do this instead. And then I am going to rearrange my data so this bar would go on top of that one and so on. So you can play around with it and it'll kind of change the shape of your data as you change the size of these bins down here. And then you can see how well that or not that interval size describes your data. Finally, we have a box plot. Box plots are really good ways to summarize large amounts of data. So again, these are good for large data sets, just like histograms are good for large data sets, and unlike dot plots. But box plots are a good way to summarize these large data sets because box plots show 5 important values. One is the minimum value. That's this first line that you see right here. That's the minimum value. And then we can see the maximum value of our data set here. That's this last line. We can see the median. That's this line in the middle of the box plot. We can see the first quartile. That's this line at the edge of the box here. And then we can see the line at the other edge of the box is the third quartile. So box plots are good ways to summarize large amounts of data. Oops. Box plots are good ways to summarize them because we easily just have those 5 data points. And then box plots are also a good way to show the range and distribution of a data set. So I can see the range, I can see the minimum and the maximum here, and then I can sort of see how things are distributed. And part of that is the skewness, as we like to call it. So how skewed is the box plot? So for example, this box plot looks pretty evenly distributed, but maybe if, oops, there we go, maybe if it looked something like this, let's say we had a box plot that looked something like this, that's a little bit more skewed to the right-hand side there. So we can see how skewed our data is. And then finally, a disadvantage actually of box plots is that we can't see, I should say specifics, we can't really see specifics. So we can't see how many values there are within a certain range. So for example, within this range right here, I don't know how many values there are. Maybe there are only 2. I don't actually even know how many values there are in this whole data set because I only know the minimum, median, maximum, and then Q1 and Q3. I don't know exactly what the specific values are. And then lastly, box plots are good for numerical data. We can't plot categorical data in this way. So that is just a quick summary of the 3 types of plots: dot plots, histograms, and box plots.